It does it on the phone, but it doesn't do it on the computer.
Good afternoon, folks. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. I appreciate people joining. And as you're saying, this meeting is going to be recorded, so others who are not able to attend will be available to view it afterwards. Okay, my clock says noon, so I will kick things off. I am Jim Freeberg, the kind of lead organizer of a coalition that formed a few years ago to revitalize DNR's Trust Land Transfer Program. Really appreciate people joining in and see more and more folks joining. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be recording this conversation for future uses. And just earlier, uh, one of the presenters asked me how many people I was expecting. And since we didn't ask for pre-registrations and signups, I said anywhere between 2 and 15. And I see there's 24 people on here. So this is incredible. Blowing my mind. Really appreciate the interest. Just a few housekeeping items. We will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the chat. And then Chris from Washington Wild will kind of help moderate the conversation. And let's see. What other housekeeping items? If you'd like to, go, Kenny.
So because I work for a state agency, I can't have the auto-generated AI stuff on. It violates our department policy. So if anybody has automated AI chat stuff or AI note taking, if you could please turn that off, um, that would be ideal.
Thanks, Kenny. Things that we didn't have to anticipate a few years ago. Okay, I'm gonna start my presentation here. And in the chat, if folks are willing to introduce yourself, and I also see that there was somebody that was trying to do AI, so I'm gonna stop that real quick. Um, if you're willing to introduce yourselves in the chat, perhaps add an email address if you're interested in learning more, especially to stay engaged in our advocacy efforts to lobby the legislature. Understand that's not something state employees are able to do, but if you do want to stay involved, put your email address in the chat function here, and we'll follow up with additional information. So, okay, let's see here. I'm going to start sharing our slides. We'll go here. Um, so thanks for joining us. Again, we're here to talk about DNR's Trust Land Transfer Program, which was once called by one of my colleagues Washington's best kept conservation secret, but I think the secret is getting out, and so I don't think it's our best kept secret any longer. Um, our goals for today are twofold. One is to help potential applicants learn more about the program and get a chance to talk to Kenny, the TLT program manager, directly, as well as John Sherwin, who's on the advisory committee, which will help to rank and prioritize applications for consideration by the legislature. So I want to give folks an opportunity to hear from both of them. And then also make a very clear invitation to join our advocacy efforts. This program is only successful because the legislature chooses to fund it, and it only chooses to fund it because it's asked to by the constituency, the citizenry of the state. So asking folks to be a part of those efforts. You're going to hear shortly from Kenny Ocker, who's going to talk all about the TLT program. I'm going to give you a little quick history lesson first as to kind of why it exists and what it is. And then we'll have a closing from John to talk more about the role of the advisory committee and how to help out in future efforts. So for folks that may or may not be aware of kind of why we have state trust lands, even I think that's a great place to start is when Washington became a state, the federal government decided that new states needed to provide services to its constituents, and chief amongst those is education. And the federal government did not have a lot of cash, but it had land that it had obviously taken over from Native Americans, and decided that that land could be used to raise revenue. So they gave it to states with the specific purpose of raising non-tax revenue for public services. In Washington, a lot of that happens from logging. There's other ways to generate revenue as well, leasing for utilities like cell phone towers, etc. Um, but the primary source of revenue for Washington from our trust lands is logging and timber sales. So fast forward a couple of years, the Great Depression came around, and a lot of landowners were able to log the timber that they had, but then couldn't afford to pay the taxes. And so those lands were foreclosed, and counties all of a sudden found themselves as the holders of quite a bit of land been recently cut over, but there was no opportunity to generate immediate revenue because those trees would take 40 years or more to grow back. And so counties had a whole bunch of land that they realized collectively could be managed by the state. In 1857, the Department of Natural Resources was created to kind of formally manage and oversee both these lands given from the federal government and collected from counties. Um, for the purposes of generating revenue to beneficiaries. And I know Kenny is going to correct me on some of these details later. Um, but again, fast forward 1989, the legislature and conservationists came together and said, hey, a lot of these trust lands, there's actually better use than generating revenue. And sometimes there's no revenue that can be generated. What if the legislature were to buy out the trust, for example, and put these lands into conservation status in partnership with local communities, state agencies like state parks, fish and wildlife, counties, in order to be stewards, ongoing stewards of these land. And then DNR could use the revenue that the legislature gave them to buy replacement lands elsewhere to provide non-tax revenue for beneficiaries. And that's how trust land transfer got started and how it's been operating for the past 30 years. However, over time, that funding declined as I think the kind of conservation community decided to turn its attention elsewhere. But in starting in 2020, a number of us got together and said, "Hey, this tool is too important to turn down. We want the legislature to again be reinvesting in it." But there were some issues as the program aged that needed to be addressed. It wasn't working quite as well as originally envisioned, and so in 2023, the legislature passed some reforms to make the program a little bit more applicable to today's day and age, really being reflective of expensive real estate values and different expectations of the public for public land. So since then, Kenny's been hired to manage the program, and over the last 3 years, due to the advocacy efforts of the Trust Land Transfer Coalition, the legislature has appropriated over $45 million in the capital budget to conserve over 12,000 acres. So pretty incredible success stories that Kenny's going to get into a little bit longer. So One resource for you, and there's going to be a link in the chat here for to a map so you can really understand what state trust lands look like. They are throughout the state. There's many different beneficiaries. Sometimes it's the state for the common school construction account. Sometimes it's counties for public services, libraries. In these trusts have to be treated a little differently per state law, and we can go into that in greater detail later. But just know that they are in every corner of the state. Um, Trying to generate revenue for beneficiaries, but sometimes there is a better purpose, conservation or otherwise related uses. So I mentioned the advocacy efforts as being really critical to why this program exists. Um, we do a variety of work to get the word out there to make sure legislators understand how important it is, and really we'll invite you again. We'll do a lobby day again this next session, the 2026 legislative session, again asking the legislature for funding for DNR to do its work, and would love to have folks be a part of that either in person with us in Olympia, or perhaps your organization, can send in or sign a letter of support. Wash and Wild has been an incredible partner, one of our many partners that has been working to rally support for this, and do want to extend a thank you actually to a few other organizations that were integral in this effort: North Cascades Conservation Council, Sierra Club, Mountains to Sound, Greenway, Alpine Lakes Protection Society, Middle Fork Coalition, Conservation Northwest, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few that I'll remember later. But many groups have been coming together to make sure that the trust land transfer program continues. Okay, that's what I've got for now. I'm going to stop sharing here, hand it over to Kenny to have him go through the process in further details. And feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll make sure we get to those.
All right, everybody. Real quick, my name is Kenny Ocker, and I'm the Trust Land Transfer Program Manager here at DNR. I just want to double check. Can everybody see our fancy dancy logo?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'll give you the brief overview. Everything Jim said about the history of DNR was, more or less correct enough. So great job there. So as Jim said, the program is designed to take economically underperforming lands that DNR manages and that have other public benefits and transfer those out of trust status, buy those out, and then allow DNR to then take the revenue from being bought out to acquire replacement lands that were better suited to be able to manage to produce revenue for our beneficiaries. We have about 3 million acres of land that we manage, of uplands that we manage across the state. The primary beneficiary is the Common School Trust, which supports K through 12 school construction, but we also have the trusts that support county governments and local governments. And then we have trusts that support the UW, the Washington State University, the normal schools, so Eastern, Central, Western Washington universities, and the Evergreen State College. We have one that supports the Capitol campus here in Olympia, and one that supports social services, so DSHS, DCYF, and corrections, and some like minor errata. The program has conserved about 130,000 acres since its creation, primarily in state parks, local parks, and then in DNR's natural areas program. So that tends to be where we see it. Historically, before the program was codified in 2023, it was only ever done for school construction, so the Common School Trust, which really limited a lot of the things that we had that were on the books and underperforming that were in other trust categories, particularly with county trusts. We are able to do some inter-trust exchanges, basically swap trust designations for some lands. But the majority of the things that are the ripest fruit for our program now are in trusts that are not the Common School Trust, just because we've been able to move a lot more of the Common School Trust lands out of trust. It was because it was the only one that we could do at the time. Okay, so we're accepting applications for this cycle through 2020 through September 30th of this year. Once we get the applications, I sit down and evaluate them with feedback from our region staff as well across the state, as well as our various specialists, including like our water rights program, our archaeologists, our clean energy program, our habitat conservation plan section, to make sure that there's not unforeseen consequences or unrealized revenue generating opportunities on these lands. And then once the applications are determined to be in the best interest of the trust, we also have to make sure that the receiving agency has the capability of managing the parcels in the future. So they're only eligible. The only receiving agencies that are eligible are either federally recognized tribes or government agencies. So it can be something as small as like a port district or a city, up to another state agency that was also eligible to receive these parcels, but private entities are not eligible because the statute that we use to actually complete the transfers is what's referred to as our direct transfer statute. And we can only do that to those public entities or to federally recognized tribes. So as long as the applications are in the best interest of the trust and the receiving agency would be capable of managing them, then the applications are provided to the Trust Land Transfer Advisory Committee, and the applicants are then allowed to present to them. So the committee has 12 volunteers that are appointed by the Commissioner of Public Lands. They'll be meeting next late spring, early summer to evaluate the applications. The applications are ranked on a priority basis based on community support, ecological values, economic values, public benefit, and tribal support. And then that ranked list is submitted to the Board of Natural Resources. And then if the board approves the list, then we submit that as a decision package to the legislature for the next full budget set, like the biennial capital budget request. The criteria are designed to be on a 0 to 5 scale, and they're weighted so that they're like equally proportioned out based on importance. So they're all 0 to 5. So the total points that you can get is 60 if you nailed everything on every step. So community support has a 2 times multiplier. That's where you guys come in. Then the ecological values has a 3-time multiplier. The economic value is just a 1-time multiplier. Then public benefits are a 3-time multiplier, and tribal support is also a 3-time multiplier. So the first criteria, it's alphabetically, is community support. So is there widespread community support for this transfer? Is there known opposition to the transfer? And if so, how is the applicant intending to manage that? What level of community outreach have the applicant and recipient completed? And then are there specific efforts to reach overburdened communities or underserved and vulnerable populations? So a great example of community support is a series of trust land transfers that created the Dabob Bay Natural Area in Jefferson County. Those have had long-standing advocacy efforts from local community members and the county government out there, and the result is that we've had several successful TLTs there over the years. Ecological value is the next one alphabetically, and so what the committee is considering is what the quality of the habitat is that's present, and what endangered, threatened, or state-sensitive species may be on the lands or use the lands. And then will the proposal create larger contiguous blocks of conservation that are more effective and easier to manage? And is the receiving agency capable of managing the lands for the appropriate conservation for what is present? A really great example of that is the Kitsap Forest Natural Area Preserve Trust Land Transfer back in '98, before DNR's old growth policy was in place that permanently conserved 530 acres of old growth forest. That's primarily Douglas firs that are in the Kitsap lowlands, which is very, very uncommon out there. Then the next criteria alphabetically is economic values. So is this proposal likely to attract more visitors to the area? Will it provide protection for shorelines that are above aquatic resources? Would it have an impact on agricultural or forestry operations nearby or other development? And then would it have a negative effect on the delivery of public services, such as like communication sites or utility corridors? One great economic impact from the TLT program is the series of trust land transfers that have created West Tiger Mountain up in King County, which is one of the first. I believe it's the first natural resource conservation area, and it's one of the first TLTs. Which there's a huge free flight community that uses the parts of the natural area that, if it were still being in active forest management, that would likely be much much diminished in terms of its use. And there's an entire like business community that has resulted from the preservation of that landscape. The next one is public benefits. So what benefits does the parcel provide, and how would the proposal affect those benefits? Those benefits can be anything from recreation and open space to distinctive geographic features or outdoor education, or even protecting historical sites. And then does the receiving agency have plans in place that would support any new public opportunities for public benefits at the parcel? A great example of that is out at Mount Si Natural Resource Area. There's been 7 TLTs that we've done that have conserved Mount Si, Little Si, Mount Tenerife, and where I picked up some hellacious blisters this spring, and Green Mountain. Then the last one is tribal support, alphabetically. And so we're encouraging all applicants to reach out to tribes as they put their applications together. There's expressly a question on there that asks applicants how they've interacted with tribes and how that has affected the development of their proposals. And then on top of that, DNR will do tribal outreach once on all the applications that are found to be in the best interest of the trust. Then the tribes have until April 1st of next year to notify DNR of any initial concerns they have, which then give the applicants and the agency the opportunity to hopefully work through those concerns with tribes. And the scoring on this one, I actually will assess, like whether the applications, whether they have. So if they get full tribal support, they get 5 points. If they get no support one way or another, they get 3. And then if there's any opposition from any tribe, the application receives no points in that category. Then, so a great example of tribal support is that tribes themselves are eligible as receiving agencies. So the Alpine Lakes Protection Society put together an application for the Beckler 6 parcel, which is right on the King County, Snohomish County border. It's an isolated 676-acre parcel that we didn't have road access to, that has a lot of northern spotted owl habitat that we're managing under our habitat conservation plan. And the Alpine Lakes Protection Society and the Tulalip tribes worked together to build an application where the Tulalip tribes would receive that parcel. And it ended up being the highest scoring application that we received in the previous funding cycle. And so the Tulalip tribes will now be able to continue the conservation of that parcel and use it for cultural use, and the agency will be able to acquire replacement lands that can support, I believe that was the Washington State University. I believe that was Scientific School Trust there. So the next steps of the program, when we receive the applications in September, from that point, we'll accept community support letters on behalf of any of the applications until April 1st of 2026, so the same time that the initial tribal feedback deadline is. That's also when we'll be cutting off submissions for letters of support for specific applications. And then once the presentations are complete, the committee members will evaluate the applications, including all the letters of support that are submitted, and then they'll submit their rankings to me. I'll compile them, have one last meeting with the committee members to kind of go over what was scored, and then we'll present those to the Board of Natural Resources probably at the September 2026 board meeting, which gives us just enough time to get the budget request over to the Office of Financial Management for their early September deadline for the January 2027 legislative session. So with that's the crux of my presentation there. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to them, or you can raise your hand afterward, and we can after John's done, we can get to those, or you can reach out to me anytime. My email and phone number are both on the slide, and I've asked Chris from Washington Wild to provide the slide deck to all of you. So with that, I want to thank you all. I know there's a whole bunch of new faces to me, folks who I haven't met here. So I really appreciate your time and you taking the time to listen.
Great. So I am now going to share some of those slides. I'm John Shuren. I am one of the advisory committee members. I'm also part of the TLT coalition, and I've been a longtime conservation advocate member of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. I'm based in Issaquah. I look across Tiger Mountain. So I'm here today to talk about my experience. I do want to start by thanking Kenny for the great presentation, Jim for the great presentation, Chris for organizing. I also want to thank Kenny for the great job he's done as the program manager for this program. When Kenny took on the role, and he had to ramp up quickly and did a fantastic job of getting a really solid program in place. And as the first go round, just excellent job all around. So it was actually, I was recalling, Kenny, too, it was this time last year, I think, that we were finalizing our submissions as committee members. Last summer was an amazing opportunity, being a part of this committee, to review the 31 applications, I believe, that were submitted. And what was really cool about it, from my perspective, first of all, I think there were 12 committee members in total, and it's a very diverse committee member of perspectives, of experience, and I felt honored to be a part of that, and really to learn from others too, and to learn about these amazing properties all around the state. The map that was shared previously, a previous version of that's very similar. I went and got printed and laminated. It's actually on my wall here, so I can see it. And actually, put little sticky notes on all the parcels. And it was so cool to take this kind of virtual tour around the state. And as part of this, I had time to go and visit a number of the properties as well. So it really opened my eyes to what an amazing opportunity it is with these parcels around the state, what we can do as a broader community, and what an impact it can have on Washingtonians. And so that's one of the things that kind of really opened my eyes. So it was a great opportunity for me personally to learn. I was really, and I know my fellow committee members would agree as well, impressed with the quality of applications, and again, how many there were. And as Kenny mentioned, in the process, you submit an application, there's an opportunity to present to the committee. And it was just great to see the presentations, the applications, the amount of energy that was presented. And again, just, different receiving agencies and opportunities, and just how well the ranking criteria worked and how well the committee worked together. And so I look forward to this next round, and we continually work together and improve the process. And as everything really that DNR does, it's transparent as well. So, you can go to the DNR website, learn about the process, learn about the ranking criteria in more detail that Kenny described, and how the process works. So it's just really, especially now, honestly, during this time of turmoil federally, we have a lot of opportunity here in Washington State to influence, how we want to live and what our values are. And I think this program really exemplifies that. So, I'm really looking forward to all the applications. As Kenny mentioned, he's available for help. Jim mentioned, I'll advance to the next slide too before Jim mentioned as well, if you're interested in getting involved in advocacy, please reach out. We need to support this program. We need legislators to be aware that the public and community want this program and want a thriving program. So I see a lot of questions in the queue and in the chat. We're going to move now to a Q&A phase. And so we'll probably start with Chris jumping on and asking questions from the chat, and then we'll have people raise their hands.
Cool. Thanks, John. We got a fair amount of questions in the chat, which is great. Starting with Janine asks, given that prime forest habitat that we'd like to see protected from logging may also obviously be considered economically performing, how do we qualify such lands for TLT status?
So the lands that have viable.
Oop, Kenny, you got muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So the lands that could have viable timber sales on them that are on base for logging aren't suitable for the trust land transfer program because they're not considered to be economically underperforming. It would take lands being ready to go for a long time without us setting up a harvest before they're eligible for this program. And there are other opportunities for the conservation of those lands that DNR manages, but the trust land transfer tool itself is not the appropriate venue for that by and large. If there are, say, for instance, isolated parcels that have that, then they can be. So like the parcel I talked about with the Tulalip tribes up on the King County, Snohomish County border, that parcel is one that technically much of the lands were on base for harvest, but it were older forests. We didn't have a bridge in place. It's up outside Skycomish, so the logging costs would have been very high, and it was an isolated parcel that wasn't in a large block that we manage. And so there are opportunities with those more isolated parcels for DNR to get out of. However, we've already gotten out of many of those parcels beforehand. So there's probably not a lot of that on the landscape that would be appropriate through the trust land transfer program.
Great, thanks, Kenny. Next question is from Phil Larkin. How will DNR tribal outreach be improved over previous years? Will an email non-response be considered as adequate outreach?
So we did have a very compressed tribal outreach timeline the last time that we did this, because instead of having me in place for the whole application cycle, I didn't start until well into the cycle in the previous time through, and so we were under a compressed timeline. So we did the best that we could given that. But we also recognized even at the time that we needed to improve the process. So the primary thing that we've done is we've encouraged all of the applicants to explain their tribal consultation in their applications and encourage them when they're putting the applications together to contact tribes and to implement what they've learned. And then additionally, we're going to give, instead of about 6 weeks, we're giving 3 months, at least 3 months of time for tribes to respond. And then we've also done targeted outreach with tribes. I spoke at length about the program at our tribal summit, which was attended by about 2/3 of the recognized tribes in the state that earlier this summer, to talk about the program, both for them as prospective applicants, but also their role in the tribal consultation process. So there's much increased awareness about the program, and we've also increased opportunities in the process for tribes to interface with it. However, we do have to, we understand that tribes are, their natural resources departments in particular are very, very under-resourced. And that they're very, very resource limited in terms of like the people and the time that they can commit to something like this. So we do have to treat non-responses as they get the 3 out of 5 on the scoring, because tribes are really, they're only incentivized to really weigh in on something that they really, really support, or that they have objections to, and otherwise, that they've got many other things that are on their plate besides my program. And I'm very cognizant of that and trying not to overburden them, because everybody is asking tribes to consult on everything, and they have a very finite amount of time to do so.
Okay, next question. Can tribes request TLTs in order to manage economically productive lands, say for logging, or is the TLT only used for conserving and protecting lands?
So the lands that DNR, the way the statute is written for this, the only lands that are eligible through the trust land transfer program have to be economically underperforming. So how tribes choose to manage their lands as open space, if they were to receive them, is their prerogative. But in terms of like the lands being economically productive, if they are still productive for us, then we wouldn't be transferring them through this program. We could engage in direct transfers to tribes at fair market value at their own cost outside of the trust land transfer program if the agency thought that it was in its best interest. But again, if they're economically productive lands, it's very unlikely that we would be moving out of them.
Can I add to that, Kenny, that once the lands are transferred as part of the deed transfer, there is language written in that says this land must be used for the purposes designated, which is conservation or related, open space, parks, etc. So there is a legal requirement put in place by DNR to ensure that the lands are used for their intended purposes.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. You said 130,000 acres was transferred from trust into natural areas. Do you know approximately how many acres of new replacement trust lands have been purchased with the funding from the TLT program?
I do. It's approximately 60,000 acres, but that is because of how the program was constructed before it was codified. So for many of the trust land transfer cycles, the program was designed as pass-through funding for common school construction account. So essentially, they'd buy out the land, and 80% of the money that went from buying out the land went directly to the school construction account, and then DNR was only able to purchase replacement land with the other 20% of the revenue from the legislature, which led to the massive erosion over time of our land assets, because we were only getting essentially the reason they were doing the 80-20 split was because timber was 80% of the value of the land, and the bare land was the other 20%, and that was the rationale. But because that had such a deleterious effect on the acreage held in trust, when we worked to codify the program, it's now codified in a way where 100% of the value of the land goes to acquiring replacement land, so that we no longer have that erosion. So you will see over time, the lands we are moving out of, by and large, are going to be things that have, by and large, are going to have older timber on them, and that is going to be valued very high. And the lands that we're tending to buy are lands that have, young reprod, or are recently harvested, or may have been recently burned over, and we're like using to fill in the holes elsewhere in our landscape. And so when you're buying land with younger trees on it, and in more remote areas, we're likely to get much more land, that acquire much more land than we lose over time. It's going to take time to make up that, probably about 80,000 acre gap. But over time, we will eventually end up acquiring much more land by acreage than we're moving out of through this program. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, can I ask actually a follow-up related to that and offer a little bit more? That 60,000 acre figure primarily is from the first 30 odd years of the program.
Yes, exactly.
I referenced, a $45 million investment. Some of that's only been available to DNR as of July 1, so you have not had time to complete the transfer, and then the funding is actually available for reinvestment. Do you have a number, though, because there have been transfers completed since the revitalization process, kicked off in 2023 of how many replacement acres have been purchased in the last few years with that?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I know most of them haven't been done long enough for us to have actually spent the replacement, the property replacement funds on. I know the money for the Eglon parcel out in Kitsap County, because that was all university trust that benefits the University of Washington. We've already reinvested all of that, but I don't remember how many acres that bought us. And some of it too is, we might not every acre, we're agnostic in terms of how we manage our lands. Our loyalty is to our beneficiaries. So, obviously we're in the forestry business, but if we have other business opportunities that arise, we could be selling something, selling timberland and then acquiring like commercial property that's very small in acreage, but is a very high value, because one of the things for the department is, if our revenue is 80% tied up in timber values, and timber is a volatile commodity, it can lead to wild fluctuations in terms of the cash flow to our beneficiaries. And so diversifying our portfolio is a really important aspect of our property acquisition. So doing acres to acres out of TLT is not always going to be, it might not be one-to-one in that sense, but I do, like I explained earlier, I do anticipate that over time, that gap of land, like size of lands disposed of versus acquired will close and flip.
Okay, next question. Of the 31 applicants, how many were accepted?
So we had 34 applicants. 30 of the applications were found to be in the best interest of the trust. Of those, so we have a $30 million cap that the legislature allows us to ask for funding for each biennium. So of the 30, the top 8 that were ranked by the committee were submitted by DNR to the legislature for funding. We got full funding for 3 of those applications and partial funding for a 4th. So we'll move pieces of that 4th one, but we're going to we'll do the other 3 first, and then see how much cash is left over. And then whatever's left over, we'll move as much of the 4th one as we can. So that was kind of what the success rate was. It will vary, whatever that $30 million cap is. If there's a bunch of smaller ones that are less valuable ones that score really well, then we'll ask the legislature for more different things. And then if there's ones where we have only like 4 applications that are, like $8-9 million a piece that are really, that are the ones that score highest, then we'll only ask for 4. It's just dependent on how much we can get within that $30 million threshold.
Okay, we're going to do one more from the chat, and then we'll go to the person asking a question. So is there a minimum score for project ranking? Are there any criteria that are essential to be considered?
So there is no minimum score, because each of those criteria is functionally essential. But we just go down the list until we hit the $30 million cap. Much like RCO goes down their list of, their priority rank list of applications until they get to wherever that cutoff is for them. We look at that in the same way.
Great. Brel, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, just a follow-up question from the previous, or I guess 2 questions ago. So for the it sounds like 30 made the cut, or were in the best interest of the trust. 8 of those got submitted to the legislature. The other, I guess, 26 or so, will they need to reapply for
Yes.
7? Okay, cool.
Yeah, we have to restart that process each cycle because it gives opportunities for the applicants to improve the things that they may not have scored as well on. And it also allows for changes in conditions. Say if a wildfire burned through a significant portion of a parcel, the some of the values may be changed, or if there were like significant development next to a parcel in the intervening time or something like that. So we to be able to and also to justly compare new applications to prior ones. The best way to do that is for everybody to reapply. But the application is substantially similar. We did tweak a few things, but many of the questions are exactly the same. And the ones that we tweaked for the better. So it will make for better applications going forward. And so that's the other reason is the application can change over time.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, lots of good questions. Plenty more. This person says you may have answered this already, but if lands are taken out of DNR's management and we're producing funds for the trust and the legislature approves, but subsequently lands are not found to replace for the trust, does that mean the approved money goes to the trust itself for distribution, or are the dollars only for land replacement?
The dollars are only for land replacement. However, we're really good at acquiring lands. It's the fun part of our job in the transaction shop is, we kind of get to go, ooh, we want those. So the odds of us not being able to fulfill that are pretty low. And if they were, it would be very much in some sort of extenuating circumstance. I don't anticipate that. We've got a good group of folks who work on our property acquisitions, like our trust property acquisitions, and they do a really good job. And like I said, it's the fun part. So there's no real concern with that happening.
Kenny, though, however, there also is an option for counties in limited instances to request cash, the cash for counties, which is kind of an alternative for counties that need the cash right now. I don't think any of those have actually requested that, only for those trust lands that have counties as direct beneficiaries.
Yeah. So Jim raises a good point there for that one with any of the county trusts, those the foreclosed lands that we manage on behalf of the counties and the junior taxing districts within them. The counties can request that 80% of the proceeds for the buying out the county trust lands can go to the beneficiaries. And so it would go just like it would to if there were a timber sale present. So it would be split amongst all the taxing districts proportionally to what the taxing, like what levels those are that parcel or those parcels would be taxed at. And that has to be done at the county's discretion. So the county commission would need to tell us that we needed to do that. So if there were lands, I don't think any of the proposals that were funded this time have county trust lands in them. But when we have funding for those, we will also be doing outreach to those counties, and we also do outreach to any counties that have county trust land at the same time we do tribal outreach, and give them several months to raise any initial concerns that they may have, or to give them the opportunity to support the applications.
Great. I'm going to lump these next two questions in together because I think they're tied.
Sorry, Chris. There's one more follow-up actually from Laura about replacement lands before we go into that I think is kind of just related to this, where she's asking about if replacement lands need to be located in the same area as the trust land that was transferred. And the answer, I mean, is, and Kenny will go into this, in the short, no. Ideally, it is a lot easier for DNR to do that because then the taxing districts line up a lot easier. But there still is an old process available called intertrust exchange where DNR can move some properties around in order to make it easier to make sure that the land bought actually benefits the taxing districts in that area.
Yeah. So Jim's absolutely right there. I lost my train of thought.
Just leave it at that. Jim's absolutely right.
Yeah. Thanks, man. So for the county trusts, we have to buy within the county, most likely. There are some like extraordinary means that we could go through to not do that, but it's a tremendous pain. So one of the ways that Jim mentioned is an intertrust exchange. We could do that. Basically, we swap trust designations, equal value between the county trust and another trust, most likely the common school trust, and then we would acquire replacement common school trust lands elsewhere. I wouldn't anticipate doing that because any of the places that have concerns about keeping their junior taxing districts whole likely would just take the 80%. And then we would just acquire lands elsewhere in the county. But for any of the statewide trusts, so like Common School Trust, the University Trust, Scientific School Trust, Ag School Trust, any of those trusts, those are statewide trusts, and we would be acquiring parcels wherever across the state would be in the best interest for those beneficiaries. So there's no impetus for us to buy replacement properties specifically in those landscapes. And there's a lot of places like if we've got parcels in King County that were to get funded for this. If we're looking to manage natural resource lands, it probably wouldn't be a prudent investment for us to be acquiring other replacement lands in King County when we could acquire them in Wahkiakum or Pacific, where there's a lot more of social license for DNR to manage lands for timber. So that is also a consideration that we take into account as we acquire replacement lands.
Great. I'm going to flag that we have a ton of questions in the queue, and we're going to do our best to get to all of them. Thanks everyone for your input. So this is kind of a two-parter. I'm going to lump together. What criteria does DNR use to define economically underperforming or economically performing? And then what are some other opportunities for preservation of economically performing lands?
So the mechanism that DNR uses for determining whether they're economically performing is, it's a lot of it is kind of experiential based. Like we know, okay, well this is land in this landscape. We can harvest timber here, or this is land where we've got a long-term lease. We're not going to do that. We need to preserve the lease and the long-term revenue that comes with it. So essentially anything that's in like a large block that DNR manages, like the middle of Capitol Forest, something like that wouldn't make sense for us to get out of because we're managing the rest of that area to produce revenue. If we've got irrigated agriculture leases or like vineyards, orchards, or we've got solar or wind leases, or like commercial sites, those sorts of things, or communications towers, those sorts of things wouldn't make sense for us to transfer out of because they've got long-term revenue that's being generated from the leases. And so when you get down to the edge cases, it's looking at the kind of making an assessment of the economic viability of it, and tapping into all the various experts we have across the agency who are doing this on a day-to-day basis and kind of coming up with a consensus opinion. I lean toward, if it's close, it's in the best interest of the trust, because we're able to capture replacement value from the value of the parcel to replace it elsewhere. And so it's much more whether it's going to cause long-term issues with other things we're managing that I tend to look at. And so that's it. I know that's a very nebulous answer. But that's how the cake actually does get baked.
Awesome. Thanks, John, for answering some questions in the chat. Keep us moving. Is the requirement to keep the TLT land in open space perpetual? I heard that there is a 30-year limit, and after that, the land can be used for other purposes, including development.
No, they're perpetual. I can't think of the word, but the deed restrictions are perpetual.
In this question may have come about in regards to in the past there were leases under the TLT program that had put kind of a time constraint on those preservation, those conservation values. So that might have been related to that.
Absolutely, and DNR is actively working to wherever we can to get out of as many of those leases as we can, because they just haven't been in the best interests of the recipients or the agency, because we don't have we don't get ongoing revenue to manage those parcels and administer the leases on our end, and so we are actively working with those lessees when they come forward, and if they express interest in acquiring the parcels free and clear, then we work with them to complete that.
Okay. I think this question has been answered already, but just to double check, why does DNR use only economic factors as value for the TLT program?
So that's on the input side. So DNR has a trust, responsibility as a trust manager to manage our assets for the highest and best use of their designated beneficiaries. And so ultimately, the trust land transfer tool is a portfolio management tool. It's helping us get out of lands that we can't manage viably anymore, and it has conservation outcomes. So that is why when we're looking at inputs and evaluating the best interests of the trust, why we're looking at it much more at the economic level. And then when the committee is looking at them, that's where the ecological values really get taken into consideration, and then the community and public benefits are expressly accounted for, is making sure that when we're funding things through this program, we're funding the most beneficial transactions that we can.
Great. I'm going to try to, we've got a lot of questions still and only 5 minutes left, but I'll go with when, who, and how are appraisals for TLT properties done?
Okay, so there's a clock with regards to appraisals being able to be accepted by the Board of Natural Resources, which is the body that oversees DNR's land management, and ultimately it has to sign off on all the transactions that DNR enters into. That clock is 6 months. So what we do from the time of the appraisal is completed until the transaction has to be approved by the board. Otherwise, we have to go back and do another appraisal. We don't want to do that because it's expensive. And every time, if we're doing that out of my program's funding, that means that we're spending that much less on the property, and we're able to spend that much less on replacement lands going forward. So it's not in the best interest of the trust to do multiple appraisals. It's not in our staff's best interest. We don't want to waste our appraisers' time. They're very, very busy. So what we do is we do our best to come up with a common sense estimate of what the parcel would be valued at in terms of fair market value, with whatever assumptions that we need to make to ensure that we're capturing the value for what would be the highest and best use of the parcel. And then we add a buffer to make sure that if property values go up, and to account for staff time spent on transactions and transaction fees if we need to go and do like boundary line adjustments or any sort of administrative things. So we basically bake in some extra space that if we need. And then we don't actually do the appraisal until after we get the funding, and when everything else is more or less ready to be taken to the board for final approval. Then we do the appraisal. That way we make sure that we're within that 6-month window, so we don't have to do the appraisal twice.
Great. It looks like we have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to say one more question and then we'll close it out. And this is one that kind of a couple people touched on, but how actively does DNR work on substituting other economic generators for the trust lands so logging can be moved away from for the main economic motivator?
That entirely depends on what the opportunities are that are in front of us. For the state to purchase property, we're often, our process takes longer than the private sector because we're the state, and so therefore it just does. And so we have to have willing sellers for whatever parcels we may be interested in, and we also have to have whatever capability there is of managing it. So, like, we really don't want to be in residential development. That's something this agency has very historically stayed very far away from. If we've got parcels that are suitable for residential development, we're happy to move those to public agencies or into property exchanges with developers to get out of those parcels so that they can develop them for residential, but we don't have the desire or capability to manage those. So with that, we try to keep a diverse portfolio, but we also are cognizant that the majority of our staff are foresters, and we're set up to manage for forestry, and we have several long-term obligations from the legislature to manage lands to produce sustainable timber harvests over time. So, we have to fit our property acquisition into our greater management setup while trying to diversify our portfolio as best we can along the way.
Maybe, Chris, we can finish up, and appreciate that there's going to be more questions there, and encourage folks to reach out for additional conversations. I'll put my email address in there. I know, Janine, you've got a lot of questions that may not have been fully answered here, but really want to thank everyone for talking here. And I know, John, you're going to have a few closing words, but really do appreciate everyone's interest and continued engagement here. So, John.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. What a great attendance. Great questions. It was awesome to see so many great questions. And like Jim said, we'll make sure to get answers to everyone for the questions that were unanswered. So again, like Kenny said, applications due September 30th. Contact him for questions. Please help spread the word about this amazing program. It's very important that people are aware. And even if there's opportunity for submitting an application that doesn't get into this round, obviously there's opportunities in the next round. So it's really great to spread the word. Stay tuned from the coalition for upcoming opportunities to show support for the program. Jim mentioned that we have a lobby day sometime in the 2026 timeframe when the legislative session begins again. So look for that. And if you have any questions, there's Jim's email there. He can probably paste it in the chat too. If you want to get involved and being part of this advocacy, it's a great group. So again, thank you so much. One more thing that Washington Wild, Chris will post a recording of this on their YouTube channel. So you can definitely, access. There'll be some links there too, as well, helpful links to maps and the TLT, website, the DNR website. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and have a great day.